More pain's coming, though, and we can talk about that in the coming weeks, because this is not just a set it and forget it and it's going to be fixed instantly. But I believe we are going to win this so-called trade war.
Welcome to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Well, David, we teased this last week, and this is really exciting. Retire Smart is now a sponsor of University of Nebraska Cornhusker Athletics. Tell us about it.
Oh, they reached out to us. That we've been supporting them. Obviously, I have been for a season ticket holder for many years, so I write that donation check every year.
You came in at a rough time too.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, every year, I'm like, whoa, this one hurts a little more if we can't get it to a positive seed. But things do seem to be on the upswing, and we were able to work out a great deal. We're an official sponsor of Husker Athletics. We will be supporting, of course, football, which is obviously the main brand we all know, but also girls volleyball, men's basketball, among some other things. And we're going to have some great, exciting news for our clients to participate in a few special activities as part of this package deal. So if you're going to the games this fall, like I will be going to them, you start looking out, you might see our name around the stadium a little bit. So it is really, really exciting, and we'll have some more information on that here in the near future.
Well, stay tuned for that, folks. This is exciting. It's going to be fun, especially this football season. All right, into the news we go, David, and we got the April jobs number. Here's a headline from CNBC. U.S. payroll growth totals 177,000 in April, defying expectations. That means exceeding expectations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So they were expecting only about 135,000 or so jobs. So it was a much better number that printed for the jobs. So this, is as Trump was out there screaming and yelling, "Hey, lower rates, lower rates." Well, if jobs are hanging in there, then the Fed's going to say we don't have to lower rates. So this may push them out. However, I don't think it's all perfectly rosy news on the job front. As I said, I think you're going to start to see more jobs deteriorate, but it's not as bad as the sky is falling that everyone was screaming here just 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Well, as a chaser to that item, you sent the team a chart about jobless claims, and that was not, as you say, not as rosy.
Yeah, and what's interesting on the jobless claims is more people are filing for benefits, et cetera. But if those of you watching online, you can see this chart here. Well, sadly, Nebraska is number 4 or 5 there on the chart.
Yeah.
So we had an increase in people claiming benefits. But look at the top. Look at that number for New York. That is like an anomaly. The more claims being filed there than anywhere else, to a alarming rate. So
more than 15,000, if I'm looking at this chart right. And Massachusetts, not as bad as New York, but still way out ahead of the pack.
And you can see by the chart, there's a couple of outliers there, but New York is so far outlying. Something might be amiss in the numbers. I don't know. We have to go dig in what was causing that. But anyway, we read data because we need to make poignant decisions. We need to make logical decisions based off of data. But sometimes there's some of these outliers in the data. You have to start doing a little further investigating, or you have to wait for another round of data to validate, was that real or was it an anomaly?
Well, tariffs, of course, the Trump tariff policy is still dominating the financial news. And most of the noise was negative, but we touched on some things last show about increased manufacturing setting up in America and so forth. Some of the noise is turning more positive. Now, you sent the team something put out by Warren Buffett 22 years ago. Now, I want to ask you, we've got a question actually in the Q&A today about Buffett announcing his retirement. Of course, that's big news. But this, I want you to share with the audience what you shared with the team. It's regarding the trade deficit. There was some buzz a few weeks ago about a social media post that seemed to indicate Buffett endorsing Trump's tariff policy. Then Berkshire Hathaway pushed back pretty strongly against that, and Buffett, if anything, has been throwing some shade on it. But you found something from 2003. Well, go ahead and explain it, David.
Well, and first off, so last Saturday at the annual shareholder meeting, just before he announced his retirement, which we'll talk about, it looks like a little bit later, he talked about, tariffs are terrible again. He put the comment out there, this is horrible. Backing away. So I just happened to pull up an article that he authored, not just a quote. He wrote the entire article and talked about we've got to stop these trade imbalances. America needs to get itself set up correctly and stop all these trade deficits. And
this was in Fortune magazine. Let me just read the headline and then turn you loose. America's growing trade deficit is selling the nation out from under us. Here's a way to fix the problem, and we need to do it now.
And it's very simple. When we buy a good from another country, we send our dollars to that country. Therefore, the wealth of that dollar, the profit of the things it can do economically has left our borders forever, right? And so these trade imbalances cannot go on indefinitely. Now, we won't have time to get into a complete economics class here, but you have to understand trade imbalances were how we fueled our economy. We are a consumption-based economy. Since we went off the gold standard, the only way to kind of keep things alive was to make sure we imported a lot of cheap goods to keep Americans happy. In other words, drive the cost of goods down, which we have, like electronics. I mean, you can buy a flat screen TV for such cheap dollars from 25, 30 years ago, right? But the problem is it comes at a cost. You have to pay that piper sooner or later. And Buffett was completely on target here telling you about this. And in the article, we don't have time, we'll post it in the comments if you want to read it. But he had Squanderville and Thriftville and just talking about, listen,
right.
You've got to be smart in what you're doing. Now, the reason Berkshire is having him back away is the investment portfolio of Berkshire Hathaway is very different today in 2025 than it was 22 years ago when he wrote this article. He owned mainly companies that were U.S. based and producing goods and services in the U.S. So he did not like the trade imbalances.
Back in 2003.
Yes. Lo and behold, today, what's the largest holding? It's Apple. And where are their products manufactured?
China or India. But
and they're trying to move it from China to India.
Yeah.
So this is directly affecting the value of his portfolio, right? And Coca-Cola, which is one of his top 5 holdings as well, they sell more of their products outside the U.S. than they do inside the U.S. That was not the case 22 years ago. Again, listen, Warren Buffett's amazing. The greatest single investor of our lifetime and probably not going to be repeated in our lifetime with his returns, et cetera. But he is protecting his investment, which is what he's always done. That's why he likes monopolies. He likes companies with pricing power, like Apple, like Coca-Cola, because they have a unique brand that you can increase prices even in tough times, and you're going to benefit. But he tells it like it is, but he's only going to say it what's convenient for his current setup and his shareholders, which that's his fiduciary duty, frankly.
Speaking of China, you've been saying for weeks now, China needs us more than we need China. Here's a CNBC headline. China's factory activity drops to 16-month low in April as trade tariffs bite. Maybe we may need to give this a little time to play out before we reach any final conclusions on Trump's
You need to understand,
trade
China
policy.
has 5 times the people we have, 5x the people. They have had 1,800 factories close in the last 30 days alone, Chip. In other words, shuttered their doors. They have people rioting, being unemployed. They have a problem. They have a whole generation without mates. If you remember, they had their one-child policy, almost all predominantly male. So you have an entire generation that is now unemployed, doesn't have a mate to go home and consult with. They have a major, major problem and uprising, and they have a real estate crisis right now. They have all kinds of issues. We've been talking about this for a while. They are in dire, dire straits. And so I believe that Treasury Secretary Bessent and Trump are absolutely right to put the throttle down on the. Yes, we're going to experience some pain here to get through this, but we will absolutely win this negotiation. They need us 10x more than we need them. I mean, it's a tenfold disparity.
Back home, David, you sent the team a chart about the debt and about interest being down on the debt, which hasn't happened.
Hey, that's weird.
Well, is this another benefit of revenue from tariffs?
So cost cutting that's already taken place, or a la Doge, has required less federal spending already. There's all this media out there. Trump's first 100 days was a train wreck. No, it wasn't. We are actually decreased spending significantly already. Therefore, the amount of money we had to borrow went down. So we had to issue. So Bessent issued less treasuries than was forecast. Therefore, we spent less on interest expense, and that is a good thing. We'd like to see that come down in mass. You look at the graph right now. It's just a little hook there at the top, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily a trend yet. But boy, it would be great if we started to bring that number down.
Going up anyway, and I see the last dip happen during the first Trump administration.
Correct, because
which also
we
had
increased
some
tax revenues,
trade
if you remember.
policy.
And by the way,
Yeah.
we just had record tax revenue again last month. Record tax revenue. Again, no, the white noise out there from the media is not telling you what's going on, but we've increased tax revenues, we've increased federal government revenues in general with tariffs, et cetera, and they've decreased spending. Those are two big positives, and people need to look out on the horizon. Again, more pain's coming, though, and we can talk about that in the coming weeks, because this is not just a set it and forget it and it's going to be fixed instantly, but I believe we are going to win this so-called trade war.
Up next, it is vital that your estate plan is properly integrated with your overall retirement plan, especially where taxes are concerned. That's why we partner with estate planning attorney Colin Kastrick. He joins us next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. The A in a SMART plan stands for Advanced Planning for all aspects of your retirement, including estate planning. We're offering another round of classes in estate and tax planning in retirement, and one of the presenters is with us today. David, please welcome estate planning attorney Colin Kastrick.
Thank you, Chip. Yes, once again, back in the studio, we have our resident authority, our estate planning and business attorney, and my good friend, Colin Kastrick. How we doing, bud?
Good. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, I want to jump right into it because I got lots I want to talk to you about this week. So just this past April, we actually had a bill to lower the inheritance tax, potentially move forward out of committee in our state legislature. So can you talk about that? And first, I guess, just give a quick understanding to everybody that we are one of only 6 states that currently still has an inheritance tax, and it's a little bit problematic if you're not an actual relative, right?
Yeah, it's important to know. So, and this is if you're a resident in Nebraska, right? So if your kids don't live here, it doesn't matter. It matters where you live. And so right now, if you die in Nebraska and you leave money to your kids, grandkids, anyone that's directly down the line, it's 1%. If you leave it to nieces, nephews, people who are related but not directly, it's 11%. And people who are not related, it's 15%, 15 cents on the dollar.
And for the first category there, the direct relatives, the 1%, you're exempt, what, for $100,000 now, right? We did improve that a few years back. So you get the first $100,000, and then it's 1% over that per beneficiary, right? Per person receiving if they live in the state. But it's basically 15% over, I think, just $25,000, right? $25,000. So that's nothing. Yeah. So basically, that's a pretty big tax for all those folks that are cohabitating, if you will, decided not to get married the second or third time, whatever the case may be, but are living together and say, I'm just going to leave the house to Betty or to John or what have you. But that house would come, in that example, if a $500,000 home, with a pretty big tax bill.
And that tax bill is due within 1 year, and there's no extension, and it's a 14% late fee.
Ouch.
Yeah, so it's, and it accrues daily. It's just, you got to get it paid.
Okay, so now we're still, this bill still proposes to charge an inheritance tax, but greatly reduce the threshold, and it takes those two other categories, not direct relatives, the distant relative and the non-relative, and turns them into one, right?
Yep, at 3%, which would be lovely.
So 1% still for relatives, and then 3% for everybody else.
Yeah, which would be great.
And then is it still the $100,000 exemption or
50 for
$50,000?
those.
Okay,
yeah. But still, it's substantially reduced there, which is great if it gets through. So they've been trying to do this for quite a few years, so we'll see what happens. But,
I don't know the exact bill, but I did know because there's going to be some loss of revenue there, right? I think it wasn't much; it was only like $3 million over a 2-year budget, so $1.5 million a year, not a big hole to fill. But I guess the way they were proposing how they would do it is increase marriage licenses, which fewer people are buying these days, and a few other county taxes, right?
Doc tax stamp on real estate deeds. So they're trying to do like more of a consumption type of, you're actually doing the transaction.
We always talk, Chip and I on the show here, it's not fun to watch them just kind of take one tax and smoke and mirrors and put it over here. But I am all for pushing taxes to the consumption side, first of all. So then at least it's a choice. You know about the tax before you make said purchase, et cetera, where so many people don't even understand, live right here in our state, have grown up here in our state their whole life, and then, oh, my uncle left me, $300,000 in an IRA. Well, we got some bad news for you. Not only is that taxable federally and state income-wise, you also now have to pay an inheritance tax.
They had 15%.
And if they don't have the cash, then they have to take a distribution from the account and pay tax on that, right?
It can be a mess. And so many people are unaware of it. And a lot of people don't know you have to pay it within that year. And that 14% rate just kills people.
Okay, so now we've been talking about the estate tax. We're one of six states that has the tax, still proposing it, which again, it's a death tax because you can't complain about it. You're dead. So let's talk about a recent celebrity who unfortunately passed away. Actually, one of my favorite actors. The man has made almost 100 movies. Gene Hackman, right? A Hollywood legend, had been in tons and tons of movies, but died under some we'll call it strange circumstances, and his significant other, both were found deceased in the home. We still don't know who maybe died first. It's a kind of a little bit of, they didn't think it was foul play, but then they thought maybe it was. But anyway, talk about the importance and the mess that's coming out of his estate and having your documents aligned to what you really want to have happen.
And it's huge, especially they had a second marriage. And it's huge for couples who are married the second time, have different kids have different goals, essentially. And so it's so important that your documents reflect what you want to happen. All these we get to say, hey, if I'm the wife and I die, my stuff goes to my kids. I'm the husband, I die, my stuff goes to my kids, right? But if you say everything
basically you have a simultaneous death, you can have it in there where, okay, my will takes care of my assets, her will takes care of her assets, et cetera.
Exactly. But you want to make sure that's in there, because a lot of people will just say, hey, it goes to my kids, and you'll say it goes to my kids. And so then if everything goes to spouse gets it, they can redirect those assets. And that's a problem as well. And so you just want to make sure that your documents work with each other. And it sounds like here they didn't. They had different goals, and the attorneys didn't draft things correctly to make sure that if they died simultaneously, where does stuff go?
And lo and behold, guess what's going to happen? These attorneys are now going to file petition after petition to the court, drag this out, and they can take this 2-3 years to settle. And that estate, which I'm sure has some decent value to it, Gene Hackman, I'm sure had some pretty good royalties. Yeah, so $80 million estate, probably going to end up spending down over $10 million of that in legal fees.
Oh yeah, incredibly. And then the other thing you see this is we talk about this on the show all the time. They had trusts, and the trusts weren't funded, so they're going to have to go through probate court. And so the point of the trust is to avoid probate, or one of the points of it. And
spend $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 creating these wonderful instruments, these trusts that will lay all the framework. And then if you never fund them, it was just a waste of time and energy.
Yeah, it's just a mess. But we see it so often. I'm not sure what the fix is other than just pushing your attorney to do it, trying to get them to help you.
Well, I mean, I talk about it all the time. One of the things that I like about, and we've referred you so many clients over the years, is you guarantee the trust will be funded within a time period, basically. And I remember coming home one day telling my wife, because in fact, you and I were talking about, we got to re-update again, right?
Yeah,
and every couple of years, I have to re-update as things change, assets grow, my kids are getting older, et cetera. But my house, lo and behold, is in, I think my wife's trust. I've got a few of them, but
I'm married. I know where it's at. Yeah.
And you know where my assets are. I don't know sometimes. So, but it's so important that you work with someone who understands the importance of exactly funding the trust. And then even though you actually are on the same floor in the same office space with us, for many of the clients we share, you literally send us a legal document directing us to change beneficiaries, et cetera, once you've updated someone's estate plan. That is critical. How often do you think someone should be reviewing these documents at this day and age? Because legislation, I've lived in Nebraska 8 years, and we've had like 5 major changes in legislation on inheritance tax a couple of times, on tax rates, and some Fed changes coming.
Oh, yeah. I say every at least 5 years. Another big problem that you have with Gene Hackman's is they didn't have a successor named. So it basically said if both of us die together, who's in charge? It didn't list anybody. And so that's another big thing I tell people, make sure everyone's alive in those documents you have listed. And if they're not, get in there and fix it.
Well, I mean, this reminds me of Prince dying, a few years back, and the estate took multiple years, and some of it's still not settled.
Yeah, and he was in Minnesota, I believe, which has its own state death tax.
Oh, geez.
And so it's just trying to plan for taxes.
So you can learn about these things and so much more at the tax and estate planning class that you and Mike Shuda put on. That is coming up May 13th or May 15th. You can come to either one of those. 6:30 p.m. at the Midwest Learning Center. You just want to go to retiresmartnow.com and click on the attend an event page to get registered. So in the couple of minutes I've got left with you, Colin, I also want to flip the script. We recently held our first proactive tax and exit planning for business owners. And this was held with Mike Shuda, who's got a myriad of letters behind his name, et cetera, including SEPA, IMA, SEPA, and Evan, CPA, and SEPA. You're actually getting your SEPA designation. But let's just talk about, for a few minutes, on business owners that need to do this type of planning for the business exit. Whether they don't, 20 years out, it doesn't matter. You got to start planning for these things now. And so we talk about proactive tax planning. I just like to talk about the angle of attack that we do, because we sit in a conference room together. We have Evan, a CPA, who's looking at from the CPA's point of view. I'm looking at it as the entrepreneur and the business owner who've started and sold multiple businesses. You're looking at it from the attorney's point of view, and then Mike Schutel's looking at it from the financial advisor's point of view, understanding the liquidity necessary, income needs, et cetera. Can you just talk about how we are able to attack that? I mean, you and I have worked through multiple business sales for clients over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it has to be a team. You got to check your ego at the door, right? And everyone's got their strengths, and we sit down and try to figure out how we can best serve that client. They said there's different ways to look at it, but the biggest thing is looking at one, taxation. How are we going to save taxes for that client? And two, if you've got a business you own with someone else, I mean, it's easy when you own the whole business yourself, right? We're just looking at tax planning for the most part. When we're looking at multiple owners, though, we're trying to make sure that, you said proactively, there's a plan in place that if one of them dies, where does that go? Not only from a tax perspective, but just from an ease of continuing the business. And so we look at not only selling the business, but, if we're going to sell it 20 years down the road, how do we have this set up if something happens before that exit period? And so, like I said, Evan will come in with the taxes. He'll tell me, hey, this is what I think we should for taxes.
I always tell people there's only 5 ways you can get rid of the business, right? Death, divorce, disability. You sell it or you will it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or what have you, or you go bankrupt. That's the second one. The will is death. But I mean, it's a reality. But if you plan properly, we can protect assets. We can preserve, even in the bankruptcy scenario, protect assets for the client. And so proactive planning and having a team that is coordinating this is so important. So anyway, I can't wait for the next round of that class. We don't have that one scheduled yet, so we'll let you know, and we'll have Colin attending that one as well. But if you're an entrepreneur and need this level of planning, I would encourage you to set up a consultation, and we will basically on the intake call kind of direct you. You should talk to Colin first, talk to Evan, the CPA first, or myself or Mike Schutel, et cetera. But overall planning, it's critical that everybody's on the same page, right?
It doesn't matter what stage you are in your business. You got to plan for it. You always plan like something might happen tomorrow.
Yeah, it's so true. So look, we are out of time. This went flying by today. But again, if you want to keep state taxes lower, or inheritance taxes, lower, you should call your legislator, because they are going to be voting on it these coming next 2 weeks. We're out of time, Colin. Great to see you. All right, we are out of time, Colin. So if you want to attend the estate and tax planning class, that will be May 13th or May 15th, 6:30 p.m. Go to our event page now. Chip, what's next?
Up next, you have questions. David Brooks has answers. Q&A is next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Into the Q&A we go, David. Well, the first question, as I hinted before, is about Warren Buffett. What's your take on the Oracle of Omaha officially announcing his retirement at the end of the year? And do you have any other takeaways from the annual Berkshire meeting? Well, I guess it wasn't totally a surprise. It was somewhat of a surprise, but not a shock, maybe, that Buffett announced his retirement. David, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say I think he didn't necessarily tell the board he was doing this, obviously, at least that's what his statement said, but I'm sure they had an inkling. The good news is he's done a great job for literally the last 10 years of laying out the succession. They kind of have their managers in the different areas, and Mr. Abel, it's kind of been known for a while, he's going to be most likely the person to get it. And the board voted literally within 12 hours of him making the announcement to solidify it. So I think it's good to him to do it now versus wait to the end of the year and announce his retirement. In other words, so he's giving you some runway there. The other thing is we knew the stock, I've been telling clients this for years, you're going to see the stock have some kind of knee-jerk reaction when the day comes if he were to unfortunately have passed away or decides it is time to step down. And the stock was down a little over 5-6%. It was like 3% in pre-market, and then basically double that during the first trading day. But in the end, that's not that big a deal, especially the gains that it's had. So I think it's great that he forecast it so that people have time to digest it before he actually steps away. The board has already validated his choice as his successor, and he will be, at least in the current form, staying on as chairman of the board, just no longer the CEO. And so you'll still have his wisdom there as much as he can contribute to it. As he said, he thinks he can bring some wisdom to the couple of key decisions. So, again, we're probably not likely to see what he's accomplished again in our lifetimes. It's certainly possible. But 60 years, he returned 5,502,000%. 5,502,000% return over 60 years. That's pretty darn amazing.
That's not bad. I got to believe that Greg Abel and everybody on the Berkshire team is so thoroughly trained in the Buffett system that there really shouldn't be too much of a drop-off or a change going forward.
No, and so, the question asked, what were the other takeaways? Well, the cash hoard's a big takeaway here. So I think I sent a graph in.
A chart, a graph showing
we've got that to put up. But basically, I showed you the graph of how big their cash hoard has now. Basically, it's just a tick under $350 billion. To put that in context, Chip, take the 12 largest banks in the United States and all the reserves that they deposit overnight at the Federal Reserve. You add all that together, this is more. Bigger than the 12 largest banks' the cash reserves.
Well, and not only was his cash trending upward over like the last decade, but over the last 2 years, he's basically doubled.
Well, for 10 quarters in a row now, they have been net sellers of stock, and they sold a ton of Apple, which is still their biggest holding in their most recent filing. So they have been unwinding stock. So what it's telling us is they don't think that it makes sense to take capital that is guaranteed to earn them around 4.25% right now if they're buying treasuries, right? Guaranteed by the federal government to then take it and put it to risk in certain other assets, right? Businesses, et cetera. Now, there will come a point where they do see that opportunity, and that will typically be through recessions, et cetera. So they've always been wise at buying in value. What's changed over the years at Berkshire Hathaway is they used to do what I call information arbitrage, Chip. They would go find a company that maybe we didn't know how valuable that company really was. Nobody did the legwork, but that was pre-internet. That was, for decades of how he got way ahead because they did the legwork. They got in, they went and investigated, they nibbled, and they start to buy more. And then they would tell you, hey, we bought XYZ company, and then everybody else would follow along, rising that stock price. Today, information is everywhere, the internet, AI, et cetera. So it's a little harder for them to do it. So now they are ending up buying just publicly traded companies a lot now, a la their top holdings, Bank of America, Coca-Cola, Apple, et cetera. So they're sitting on this cash hoard waiting for the opportunity for these companies to get depressed or, their prices depressed down in value, and they will go in and buy things on sale. The other part of it is, I believe, part of this cash hoard is simply part of when, unfortunately, Mr. Buffett does pass away, there's going to be his estate plan is going to allow for large distributions to a couple of charitable trusts that for his kids will each basically be running. And I believe that they want to have cash on hand for when those shares need to get sold to do some of the philanthropy that those foundations are now being set up to do. So part of this cash hoard, I believe, in part, is probably strategic for knowing that day is at some point in our near future. But the rest of it is they're telling you they do not see a lot of opportunity out there. Now, we talked about the market value in general. I told you the market's been overvalued for a while. 5,200 was somewhat fair valued. We went down all the way down to 4,700 recently, and we may go down there again. We're above that today. But as the market sold off and was like, oh, the sky's falling. No, we just got down to more normalized pricing. And typically what they're going to do is they're going to look for worse than that, right? Pricing even below that. So if a recession comes and the market fades 15, 20, 25% down, then they'll go in there and start to buy things they think are on sale.
Well, you just reminded me that you did send the team something about the S&P 500. One of the knocks on Trump's tariff policies, it's crashing the markets. Well, actually, that's not what the numbers say.
No, because the earnings estimates have come down. So, the funny thing is, when I talked about the market being overvalued back in January, Chip, or when it was making an all-time high, it's actually more overvalued today than it was then because of the earnings estimates going down. In other words, if we're willing to pay a multiple of what it is, earning estimates have come way down. So therefore, the stock is actually more expensive, even though the price is less. Hopefully that makes sense to you at home. But this is what we do. We analyze data, and then we would just want to be prudent and basically allocate capital at the opportune time, a la what Berkshire's sitting on cash for right now. They believe it's not the opportune time to put that capital to work. At some point, they will feel otherwise, and you'll hear about it after the fact, and they will go in and spend some of that hard-earned capital. But to kind of just get the take of the call, I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but Warren Buffett is a legend.
It's worth it. Yeah.
So I sent out one of his quotes that I love. He's got a lot of quotes out there. And basically, the quote was, who you associate with is just enormously important. Don't expect that you'll make every decision right on that, but you're going to have your life. You're going to have your life progress and general direction of the people that you work with, that you admire, and that become your friends. And there's the rest of the quote we can post online there. But the old adage is, you are who you spend the five people you spend the most time with. That's kind of who you end up becoming. I try to spend a lot of time, as you guys know, with friends of mine that have firms just like this in other parts of the country. I go vacation with them now. I spend time with guys because iron sharpens iron, and you're a product of those that you surround yourself. And he's just telling you, sometimes you get lucky breaks in life and what have you, but you want to surround yourself with really great people that will help you make great decisions. He tells you Charlie Munger was the smarter of the two. He said, in various verse, but he surrounds himself with his board, all his people, and he's bragging on them. And I just think that's his legacy, is he found how to get the most out of a conglomerate. It's not just him. He wasn't just the Oracle of Omaha just pulling stock picks out of the wazoo. He's surrounded himself with a lot of smart people to make great decisions.
I've seen you practice what you are right now preaching. You are very careful in the way you put together our team at Retire Smart. We've been growing wildly. We're over 40 people now, but every hire is very carefully evaluated. David, let's shift gears now. A tax question. You and our in-house CPA, Evan Marshall, were talking about this at our recent team meeting. Congress is back in session. What are the prospects for the Trump tax cuts of 2017 being extended or made permanent?
So right now, it's about a 90% probability that they get extended. Permanent, I don't think so. I think that's less than 5% probability. And you have to understand the rules of Congress. You'd have to have a lot of Democrats vote for it, which is not currently the makeup. But with a simple majority, they can use what's called reconciliation and propose potentially deficit spending up to 10 years. We believe that the tax rates, even if they're extended for 10 years, will not stick around for 10 years. They'll stick around probably at around 2030. You're going to go through the next presidential election, and then after midterms is when the tax bill is likely to change. So we might have a window of 4 to 6 years with lower tax rates. That's what we think is going to be the case. Again, it's not set in stone, and we should know more potentially here by August, at least the current framework that we're hearing, the way they're trying to do this. And again, they didn't sell the tariffs right. I talked about that. What they were trying to do is give more tax breaks to lower income people, because that's where Trump won this election's margin by, was those making less than $100,000, a ton of blue collar folks, a ton of non-college educated folks. And so they're trying to put tax incentives in place to benefit that particular subset. And they were trying to pay for that with some tariffs. So in other words, if you have to pay 3 or 4% more for goods and services than you were a year ago, but your tax bill was cut by half or more, and you're in that income area, you have more free cash flow, right? So you're actually going to be doing better than you were, and that's what they're trying to do, is are you going to be better off? So again, we'll see what it comes out. There's a lot of changes being written. There's even a potential to put a tax bracket on higher income earners than we currently have. That's gotten some pushback recently, but again, that's how compromise gets done. We'll see what it comes out to be.
Up next, trouble continues brewing in the housing market. We'll tell you about it next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, we've been talking about the housing market the last couple of weeks, renters, home buyers, and so forth. And now it's the home builders getting nervous. Actually, you sent us 2 charts. One is on home builders getting nervous. One is on excess housing inventory. This was in Florida. Apparently, Florida's got more excess inventory than all the 9 northeastern states put together. That's New England plus New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. What is going on right now in the housing market, David?
Well, markets that went a little bit crazy, a la Texas and Florida in particular, those 2 markets, because during COVID, they had a ton of people move there, had cash because all the stimulus, right? And prices were going up. So those housing markets went almost parabolic. Florida did for sure. And I own property in Florida, full disclosure, and so I made money during this. But Florida now has seen more listings than they've ever had in their history. And as you said, it's now more than 10 states making up the northeast quadrant of the United States listed for sale in Florida. So that tells us that you're probably going to see prices start to fade and aggressively start to fade. And we are certainly seeing this. The amount of listings just even in Omaha is popping up, right? And things are slowing down. So the sales are not turning over unless the seller is willing to discount their price. And so now you have sellers listing houses for sale, and then you have new home builders having to make some incentives. So, and we also have a chart here just showing you the Los Angeles housing supply skyrocketing, the listings coming on there. And remember, with the fires we had out there, Palisades, et cetera, you would think that wouldn't be the case, but no. It's time to pay the piper. The cost of insurance on these homes, the cost of taxes on these increased valuations, people are saying, I can't do it anymore. The consumer is tapped, and so now the housing market is going to face a bit of a drawdown. And so I sent you an article that kind of showed you a headline from the Wall Street
Look at
Journal.
These Wall Street Journal headlines. Yeah.
So in 2007, there was an article written, "Hey, home builders are piling on incentives to get you to come buy," right? And it was a trap, if you will. People bought these houses. Oh, I'm getting an extra $5,000 bonus. Well, the house dropped $50,000 in 3 months in value. So was it a good deal? Well, guess what's happening today? Wall Street Journal just put an article out. Home builders are piling on the discounts and incentives again. You get a free upgrade on blinds or whatever, window coverings, because they cannot move their inventory. So be cautious, be careful out there. The housing market is in some trouble right now and is going to go through some pain, and it's going to take, typically when the housing market corrects, it's a 1 to 3 year process to go through. This isn't something that will fix because interest rates drop 100 basis points. The housing market is going to go through some pain.
There are cycles, there are rhythms to all this. That's why we monitor all this data so carefully. Speaking of monitoring the data, speaking of, well, this goes into Economics 101, I told you so, I guess. The headline from the Santa Monica Daily News is, Pepperdine, of course, is a university out in California. Pepperdine study claims fast food minimum wage prompted job losses. Now, Harvard and 2 California universities, the one in San Francisco and the one at Berkeley, they both put out studies saying, no, wages went up. This is when California, of course, it was at $20 or something, a mandated minimum wage. No, this won't hurt jobs at all. Everything's doing fine. Well, now Pepperdine's blowing the whistle on this, saying, no, it's doing exactly what Economics 101 tells you. It's going to cost people jobs when you jack up the cost of labor like this.
Absolutely. You get to a point of diminishing returns. And so, yeah, again, minimum wage, people want to argue all the time. I don't really care about minimum wage. I just tell people, because whatever you set it, it's just going to end up in the price of the goods and things that we buy, right? And the old adage is whatever minimum wage is, that's about what a meal will cost at the average fast food place. So if you have minimum wage at $12, then it's going to cost you about $12 to drive through and get a meal at Chick-fil-A or et cetera, right? If you raise it to $15, where California was, but California jumped from $15 all the way to $20, and it's cost tens of thousands of people their employment, and it's cost several of them that's still employed hours that they depend on and count on. Because again, it's just Economics 101. It's so simple to understand, yet we don't teach economics, unfortunately, Chip, in high school anymore, and so people do not understand. You can make minimum wage $50 an hour. You're not going to be better off. You're going to be worse off within 18 months because the cost of everything you buy has to go up to pay for that labor. There's no free lunch, right? And the other problem is this hurts promotions at work. I started my first job off the farm at Chick-fil-A in the Spotsylvania County Mall.
You claim to have been on the ground floor for the Chick-fil-A sauce.
Yes, it was our version of the honey mustard we made in-house before they even had a sauce. And the Washington Post did a story on this. It's true. It turned into what you now know as Chick-fil-A sauce. But Chip, I was paid $3.35 an hour. That's my starting wage when I worked at Chick-fil-A, and I had to wear a little bow tie and this big polyester uniform, right? But I hustled, and I got a raise to like $3.50. Right, and then to $3.75, and I was a shift supervisor, whatever the title was called. Started the management. Imagine that. It was like $4 an hour. Woohoo! But people understand is you had room to promote and pay somebody who was more productive at work. If you just keep raising minimum wage, you have to pay everybody the same wage, because maybe somebody was $15 an hour, but somebody over here was working twice as effective, and you're paying him $18 an hour. You got more productivity out of the $18 guy. You're glad to pay him. And the idea is he'd set an example. The guy who's making $15. Well, I want to make 18 like John over here. Well, be as productive as John and we can pay you. But if you just force these wages, you lose productivity, you lose profit margin, and you have to increase the price on your consumer, your customer, your client. We've got to get back to teaching financial basics in this country, but we have a country full of illiterate people financially. It's sad when people go to get financial advice on TikTok and videos and YouTube. You're watching this channel, but you've got to understand the basics, and we've got to do a better job of explaining that.
David, here's another labor-related item. You sent me a headline from Zero Hedge. Native-born workers surge by over 1 million, back to all-time high, as government employees tumble. Is this a result of the border being closed down? Is this a crackdown on H-1B visas or what's
Absolutely.
happening?
So we just had the lowest border crossings in 25 years last month, right? So
Okay.
shutting down the border, which is one of the campaign promises, actually happened. And amazingly, Chip, you have native-born Americans getting jobs. That is awesome to see. So we don't have great job numbers, but 1 million jobs have been increased in the first quarter by native-born Americans already this year, simply because the illegal immigrants that were taking those jobs, and Americans will, this adage, oh, they won't take the job. Well, if it pays the right wage, they will take it. And if they need, if you don't hand out things like welfare, if you hand out to those, hand up, not handouts, right? And people are encouraged to go get work, they will take the job. And again, but if you keep increasing minimum wage, you're going to take away the incentive for someone to outperform their fellow worker. But yes, amazing stat on now we have all of a sudden all-time highs that fast in 100 days.
David, I'm only going to give you about 30 seconds for this, but I want to squeeze this in because you sent the team a chart comparing bond yields with crude oil, and over the years they generally track each other.
So this is the long end of the curve. This is the 30-year bond yield, so a long-term yield.
A large disparity has developed between the yield figure and the crude oil figure. What does it mean?
So this is showing you that there's something under the hood that is yet to be explained. In other words, why do the yields go up and price of oil go up in tandem over a long-term chart? Well, if the economy is doing well, right, then things are heating up. We typically have a little bit of inflationary pressure when things are doing well. So yields rise. The Fed raises rates to keep the growth within control. We don't want things to go parabolic because then you get hyperinflation. So they raise rates to try and control the amount of growth. Well, oil typically goes up when things are doing well, right? If the economy is booming and we're growing, then oil can sustain a little bit higher price because there's more demand. Well, when oil is dropping off, that's telling you demand is not there, and oil is crashing all the way down to $56 a barrel right now from like $80 not that long ago. So oil going down, well, it's cheaper to buy at the pump, but that's usually a sign that we're headed for an economic slowdown. But usually when you're headed for an economic slowdown, you see interest rates fall as well. But the Fed has been fighting Trump and not lowering rates. And so the bond market, right now is still holding higher yields. One of them is going to be right. Either we're having big inflation or we're having deflation. Two different markers here. So I'm betting on deflation. I think oil is right and the yields are wrong, which means the yield will probably fade here over the next 12 months. Again, we'll wait and see.
That'll do it for this week. Please visit our website, retiresmartnow.com, and click Attend an Event at the top of the page to see everything we currently offer. There's no charge, there's no obligation for our events, but you do need to register. You can do it online or by calling 402-369-7777. David, bring us home.
Hey, go Big Red. We're really excited about our partnership with the University of Nebraska and the Huskers, and you have a blessed and prosperous week. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. For David Brooks and the entire team at Retire Smart, have a great week. Colin Kastrick and Kastrick Law LLC are not affiliated with Retire Smart and were not compensated for his appearance or any implied endorsement. However, Kastrick Law is a tenant of, receives referrals from, and shares clients with Retire Smart.